Hey everybody, Scoutcrafter here. Well, I had this video made actually finished about a week and a half ago. And lucky I did because this weekend I was in the hospital with a kidney stone. And I'll tell you something, I haven't been in the hospital since I'm a kid, get my tonsils out. And a kidney stone is no joke, something you want to avoid if you can. But so I don't know how much I'll be able to do this week. I'm kind of just getting over it and a little loopy, but we have this video put together and I'm glad we did, so let's get to it. Okay, today's project. Okay, here's the backstory on this wrench. Now, we have a friend of the channel. His name is David. David is a big fan of the channel, has been for a long time, and he has a friend of his named Tara. So they were talking one day, and he said, Tara was saying, "What do you want for Christmas?" He says, "Well," David said, "if I can have anything, I'd like one of those Billings bicycle wrenches restored by Scoutcrafter." So she said, "Oh, really? Well, I don't know if that's going to happen." Anyway, Tara contacts me, and she asked me, "What's the chances of getting that done?" And I said, "Well, I did a few of these wrenches before. It's kind of a rough thing to keep doing them, but." I was really taken in by the story, and she really wanted to do this for him. So she sent me the wrench, and we looked it over, and it's obviously doable. But I said, how could we do this to make it interesting for the people? So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this, and for the beginners, for people, I'm going to answer a lot of questions that that weren't answered before for newer viewers that might not know the procedure of actually how to restore something like this. So the first time you get a wrench like this, let's go through it step by step. Okay, now the first thing you want to do when you're looking for a wrench, if you want to restore one or things like that, is you want to make sure it's not too beat up. And a lot of times you'll get like around the jaws here, if you see them mushroomed out, that's a little bit more difficult to fix. This one here is in really nice shape, except it's got a lot of pitting. You see the pitting on here? And so when you look over here in the back, you see here, somebody had this on there and we're banging it, to try and free a nut or something. So, you're going to have to take those out. So you have to see what you're capable of doing. If you're doing a typically all hand restoration, you want to stay away from any big gouges and things like that a machine would make easy work of. But you could see all the pitting here that we're going to have to deal with, right? And especially on the jaws, you see, that's some deep pitting. And if you're doing this by hand, strictly by hand with sandpaper and steel wool and things like that, this is a wrench that would be a little bit too much. You would want something in better shape. Now, by better shape, I mean a wrench like this. You see here, this is another Billings Model A, but you can see the jaws are perfectly straight. There's no pitting. The only thing is that this is painted, that they use the paint. You can see the paint is starting, but just a little bit of paint flaking here. This is a relatively very easy restoration. This would be a good one to start with, especially if you're using hand tools. But let's get back to Tara and David wrench. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run it through the wire brush so we get a good look of what's going on. Now, when we talk about wire brush, basically a wire brush is nothing more than wires that are attached to a wheel that can go on some kind of spinning device. Now, you could use a drill, and this is very common. You could buy these. They already have a shaft on here, and you could put them into a drill, and you could use those. Now, for the most people, if you're going to use one of those battery drills, they really don't have enough RPM. You really need a quicker drill or a drill press. You want to get this spinning a little bit faster than most battery drills will allow, but it can get the job done. The preferred way is to use a bench motor and to use a wheel like this. Now, you could buy a wheel like this at Harbor Freight or something. They run around $5, and you could see they have a little hole in here, and you have to see what shaft size you have and then match it up. There's a little bushing in there if the shaft is a little bit smaller. If it's a little bigger, you take that bushing out. Now, on most bench grinders, you'll see here, you could just put the wheel on with a nut, and that'll suffice. Sometimes, if you're going to use a regular motor, like if you have a motor from an old washing machine or an old motor laying around, you'll have to get what's called an arbor adapter. If you have a motor that just has a round shaft with a flat spot on it, you're going to need what's called an arbor adapter, and that's this little piece here. It's got two screws, and you basically slide it over the shaft, tighten the 2 screws, and then you can mount your wire brush onto that. Now, there are a lot of different types of wire brushes too. Now, first thing you want to look at is some wire brushes are very stiff, and you can see here, this is quite stiff of a wire brush to use. And this one here they sell as a brass wire brush, but it's just steel brass coated steel. You can see this is a much softer bristle. So that you're going to have to, a lot of times, and it's hard to tell when they're in a package what they are like. This one here looks kind of soft, but it actually is a little bit more stiff. So sometimes you got to buy a couple to see where you stand with that. Now, the one thing you want to stay away from, if ever you see something like this wire brush with one of these on, that's for an angle grinder. And if you see these twisted wire brushes like this, you don't want to use these. This is basically for deep rust removal on like something like an anvil or some iron or anything that's construction related. These really aren't for us. So we want something that's a little bit softer and something that will not damage the tool as much. Now, if you notice a lot of motors, the first thing you're going to notice is you'll see that there's usually 2 speeds. You can get the normal speed is about 32 to 3600 RPM, and then you have what they call a slow speed, which is 1700 RPM. 1700 RPM is a lot easier to work with, and but it just takes a little bit longer because it's not spinning as fast. When you get these high speed models like you have here, which is basically like a bench grinder, that's going to be a higher speed. The slower speeds are usually buffers. Sometimes you'll find a slow speed buffer, but you're going to see most of the time you get around 3000 RPM. Now, depending on the size motor you have, if you have a very fast motor like a 3450 like this one is, you don't want to use a very large brush like an 8-inch brush. You want to try this as a 5-inch brush, and that's what this is. That's about the maximum you want to go with here. And it'll always say on the here what the maximum speed is. This one says 8500, so you're well within the realm. Now I'm going to show you the difference of what 500 RPMs looks like compared to 3000. Why we prefer a bench model wire wheel over like something like a drill press. This is 500 RPM, and let me show you what it looks like. Okay, now you see that's in real time, and let's take a look at it. You could see that was just less than a minute, but real time we did this area here with that 500 RPM. You see how slow and tedious it is, and it does do some work, but let me show you what happens. I'm going to do the same piece on the bench mounted wire brush. So here we are at the bench mounted. We're going to use the same piece but the other side. Okay, this, you could see the rust on here. Now we're going to do it with the bench mounted brush. So you see, it takes about half the time, but they do very similar jobs. So you can use the drill mounted or something, but it just takes a little bit longer, but they will get the same job done because you're just getting the surface rust off. A wire brush won't do any more than just getting off the surface rust and things like that. So now we're going to do the whole wrench. Take a look at it. And here's our post-wire brush evaluation. Now, after we wire brush the tool, we take a good look at it to see if there's any cracks or anything we have to before we get started. But you can see here, there's a lot of pitting, and I know this pitting looks bad now. It is bad. You see down here, especially around the edges here, and then again with the back with the beading on. So it's going to be rough to get it out of here, right? There's no way to get around that. The only way to get around that is to go below the pits. And we want to keep the lettering, but we got to get below the pits. So we're going to have to take this to the belt sander and then get that. The threads look decent. And of course the knurling nut usually comes out very nice usually. So Let's go over to the belt sander. We're here at the belt sander now, and this is a 1 inch wide by 30-inch belt, and the belt sander will be called a 1x30. Very inexpensive, and basically how it works is you take a belt. Now this is the important thing. Belts come in very different sizing, what they call grits. They're all 1x30, but you can see here, you can see this one here has a more aggressive grit, like this one back here, more aggressive grit, and this one here, very fine grit. And I save all my old belts because as they start wearing down, you can always use them still as a lighter grit. But we're going to start off with a pretty coarse one today because we got to get below those pits. And let me just show you real quickly how fast a belt sander will go through the grits, through the pits. Okay, you can see here we got rid of all the pits. We had to take it down a little bit, but now that's a coarse. You can see the little striations there, but that's the way they used to come from the factory, believe it or not. You know, and you can see it does have a little bit of a shine to it, but that's just off the belt right there. Now we have to do this side, and then we have to do the rest of the wrench, obviously. But you could see me using this little stick behind the belt, and there's a reason for that. This comes with a steel platen, but that's only for flat areas, and it's very difficult to work with. By me using this little stick touching the back of the belt, I can form it around different areas, and I found it to work really well. So let's get finishing on the rest of this wrench. Okay, here we are, all belt sanded down. It's starting to look nice, and here's where you have to check out a couple things. Now, first of all, we can see that the jaws don't really line up right. And instead of this being parallel, you can see it's a little open towards the front. So when you take this apart, you can see, if you look real close, that it's bent right here. So obviously when they were banging on the back of this wrench, that's what opened it up and bent it. And you could see here, if I hold a straight edge against this here, you could see that we have a little bit of a gap up front there that has to come down, and it has to be, the bend is right here. See it? So we're going to have to tilt this down. Now, I was thinking of the dake. I'd like to use the dake, but if I put pressure on here to bend this way, it could flatten this out and widen it. So we're going to have to kind of undo what the damage was from before. So we'll take it over to Great Grandpa's vise. Well, I couldn't really do it at Great Grandpa's vise. We got some of the twist out, but I think I'm going to have to try and use the dake to get that little area out. So let's see if we could do it using the dake, and hopefully we can straighten this press out. When it comes down, we're engaging here, and hopefully that's where the bend will be. Let me drop you down a little bit so you can see. Here we go. And we're going to press it into here and see if we can't straighten it out that way. Okay, we got everything straightened out. Looks really nice. And now what we have to do is just there's little bits of marks and things like that that's left behind from the grit of the sanding belt. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take that to the buffer. Now, if it's not shiny like this, the buffer's not going to get the pits out or anything. The buffer just takes out the micro scratches that are left behind from the belt sander. Now, when you want to start buffing, there's first two things you're going to need. You need a stiff buffing wheel. You see how many threads there are sewn up here? And this is very stiff. You can see it's stiff. This here is a floppy wheel. You see that? This is a soft wheel. This is good for jewelry, things like that. You don't want that for what we're going to be doing this for. You need a hard wheel. And then there's also things called buffing compounds. And what a compound is, it's an abrasive that comes in a paste form that when you touch the wheel, it'll go onto the wheel, and that's what gives you the shine. Now, this is a buffing wheel compound set that they still sell today. NK makes it. Comes with, you can see here, black, brown, white, and red. And what we use for steel, it's called black, which is an emery. And I buy this from Amazon in a 1-pound brick like this. And this lasts you a long time, especially, you know, I'm doing restorations all the time. So I go through this about every 6 or 8 months. But for the normal person, it'll last you half a lifetime. And all you do is you just touch it to the wheel slightly and then work on this. And let's show you how that works. Now, traditionally, buffers at 3,500 RPM. This is where you want a lot of speed because you want to build up heat and it's going to get hot. So when you touch it here, you're going to be only working on it for a few seconds before this gets too hot to hold. When it gets too hot to hold, you put it in a bucket of water, cool it down, dry it off, and resume. So you're always back and forth between the water and the buffing wheel. But you don't want to get this wet, but just dry it off again. And you're just going to take off any imperfections that might have been on here from before. Now you know our favorite part. Remember what it looked like before we started. And we are calling this wrench done. David, I think you're really going to like this one. Tara really hooked you up, but there's a lot of work in here. another 5+ hours. Let's go over what we did. Everything's nice and cleaned up, shines. It works. Look at how nice this works. You know, that's the one thing about these Billings wrenches. When they're set up right, look at that. It is smooth as silk because the threads are all polished. It's the jaws are parallel now. The pitting, remember all the pitting that we had? Most of it's almost gone. I mean, it's a nice wrench now. We're able to keep most of the lettering. You know, some of it, you know, you're always going to lose when you got that much pitting over there. But really a nice, beautiful wrench, as all these Billings are. And let's try it out, see how it works. Okay, we have the original wrench tester here. First thing we're going to do is snug it up onto the nut. Okay, get that up here nice and see how this works. Oh yeah. You know, this is about the biggest nut you would really use it on, but you can see how nicely this works. It is a beautiful wrench. I always love these Billings wrenches. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know there was a lot of newbie stuff in there, but this is going to be great if anybody has any questions or anything. And you can see David and Tara, Merry Christmas. Hope you enjoy the wrench. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.